Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon, everybody. For those who don't know me, I'm Yannis Maniatis, the Vice President, S&D Vice President, in charge of Foreign Affairs. I warmly welcome all of you, our guests from Israel and Palestine, members of the European Parliament, and civil society representatives to this important S&D event on peace in the Middle East and on the prospects of the two-state solutions, a topic that is very important for the S&D group in particular and for the progressive political family at large. Concerning the logistics, there is interpretation in English, French, Spanish, and Italian. This event is also web streamed on the website of the S&D group. There is also coffee and water available in the room, so you don't hesitate to serve yourselves. Without further ado, I would like to give the floor to our President Iratze for a few welcoming remarks. Iratze.
Thank you, Yanis. Thank you all of you for being here today in this important event for our political family and for all Europeans. Finally, I think that we are trying to have this open exchange with all of you. I will continue in Spanish. Maybe some of you will need translation. Querido alto representante.
Dear High Representative, Pepe, dear Nasser and Mohsin, dear friends, welcome to the European Parliament. This house and heart of the European democracy for the peoples that were condemned to not understand one another. It's a pleasure to have friends here who are committed for the peace and the two states of the Middle East, which keeps our hope alive. Last October 7th, we witnessed the cruel attack of Hamas with over 1,000 victims and hostages alike. This was a barbaric attack, one that perhaps could not remember since Nakba in 1948. Before October the 7th, many thought that the Abraham agreements would bring the peace between Arabs and Israel. They were wrong. Those agreements forgot what's most important: the peace between Israel and Palestinians. Pepe, in December, you raised your voice in Spain and also in New York during the General Assembly of the United Nations to raise the question that should have been answered a long time ago. If the solution in the Middle East is not the two-state, what is the solution? Those who oppose this solution of the two states do not show any other alternative than death, destruction, and pain. Dear friends, we understand the pain of both peoples in Israel and Palestine. In life, to understand the pain of others, it's necessary and very important in order to resolve the conflicts. We have met with the families of the hostages from Israel. We've seen the images of the atrocities committed by Hamas. And we have witnessed the horror in the kibbutz. We feel the pain of the society in Israel because the EU and Spain have also been victims of terrorism. Israel has the right to defend himself against Hamas, Hezbollah, and the regime of the Ayatollahs. And in its fights against terrorism has our support. But Netanyahu has no right to dehumanize the peoples. Palestinians and Lebanese people have the same rights and freedoms of other citizens in the world, and their lives should be protected, because every democracy should respect the values that found it, the same values that draw the line between civilization and barbarity. It's not the moment to fall into ideological battles and to have two faces. The massacre in Gaza is judging us in front of the entire world. outside our borders, they will ask us why the lost lives are worth more in Ukraine than in Gaza. Why the decisions in the United Nations are more important than the resolutions that Netanyahu does not appreciate. After more than 1,000 lives lost in Gaza, how many more deaths should be taken in order to listen to the voice of the European Union? Does this mean that we are going to resign ourselves to the fanatism that leads to catastrophe? After this horror in the 21st century, we should stop Netanyahu into his way to total war. He is ignoring the shout of the people demonstrating in Israel to do a ceasefire. He's denying the entrance of humanitarian aid, and he is carrying out these atrocities to the Lebanon with total impunity. So now words are not enough. Now we should provide all solutions so that the international law is respected. Let's sanction the members of Netanyahu's government who publicly deny the existence of the Palestinian people, and let's lead an embargo on weapons so the European Union is not an accomplice of the unreasonableness by Netanyahu. Likewise, we should demand the very only solution to avoid repeating this human tragedy in the Middle East, the two-state solution. So after centuries of cruelty in the Middle East, and after the killing of 6 million of Jews by the Nazi regime, the people in Israel accomplished their own state. The Palestinian people have the same right, the right to their own sovereign state, a state in Palestine which could coexist in peace with the state of Israel. In the last decades, Israel has built a progressive and developing society, and Netanyahu should understand that the only way to protect the people in Israel is with the absence of war, because never, ever will be such a power of iron and wall so high to avoid violence. Violence can only be avoided by peace, and peace should be fair, because it's fair that Palestinian children can also grow up in their own home without the power of those colonizing him. It's fair that everybody can travel freely in the West Bank, and the farmers in Palestine can work their land. And it's fair that the families in Palestine could live in their own state without the control of a foreign army. No war, no occupation, and no expelling is the answer. The only answer is the solution of two states coexisting in peace. If peace was possible after centuries of war in the European continent, it is also possible in the Holy Land, and it should be so. So it's the moment to remember with our friends from Israel and Palestine, why are we here gathered today? The European Parliament is not the result from a bureaucracy fallen from heaven. This house is here today thanks to the courage, personality, and convictions of men and women from different nationalities and ideologies, men and women who did not have an easy life, but who understood that only through the word, only through understanding, only through negotiation, it is possible to live in the same space, in peace and freedom. Dear friends, if the spirit of reconciliation from our founders could overcome hatred, now it is a time for Israel and Palestine to negotiate the peace, and it's our obligation to accompany you. The responsibility of the EU as a power which aspires to lead an era of global peace is to contribute to this peaceful solution, a solution to a free Middle East, where walls will be broken down forever and the weapons will be removed forever. A Middle East with open ways, schools, hospitals, and dignified homes. In essence, a Middle East that could be called a home. Keep on and keep on was the shout of Monet, who encouraged Europeans in the dream. So now is the time to be able to keep on with the dream of the different agreements, Stockholm and in Camp David, and also to keep on with the words Yasser Arafat in the Prince of Asturias Prize could guide us now. Let's work against the human nature who seeks vengeance. Let's keep on working so the enemy becomes our friend. Let's stop those who are really causing so much bloodshed and agony and hatred. We want to have a life of peace. Thank you very much. And now I'd like to leave the floor to our High Representative and to really thank him from the bottom of our heart to be here in such an important event for our S&D family, but above all for his commitment, his leadership, his courage, sometimes and many times uncomfortable, but always backed up by reasons during this past year from October the 7th. Thank you very much, Pepe. The floor is yours. Thank you very much, Irache.
Me to participate in this debate. Well, last week, with the anniversary of the 7th of October terrorist attack, has taken place in a process of ongoing escalation on several fronts, and the whole region in the Middle East is on the brink of an all-out war, unhappily. This is the trend, and this is the scenario. What we are living today is a new cycle of violence, hate, and revenge, which is increasingly engulfing the entire Middle East. These events have enormous consequences for the European Union. But in spite of that, unfortunately, we have not been able to influence the course of events due to our lack of unity. That's a fact. You can hear voices saying recognition of the Palestinian state, and others saying no, that's not the moment. You can hear voices saying stop selling arms to Israel, and others saying we will continue selling arms to Israel in the same social democratic family. You can see votes at the United Nations, yes, no, and abstentions in almost every vote that took place about the Middle East crisis. I'm not going to go until the reason for this big divide. That's a fact of life that has roots in the history. I prefer to look at the 5 dimensions of our foreign policy, the 5 limits or considerations in which we have to navigate. We have been trying to navigate on the last year. The first one, it's important to start with, is that Israel has a right and a duty to protect its citizens. As former Defense Minister Gantz recently wrote, the trauma of the Israeli society goes beyond the events of the 7th of October. It's not only the 1,200 people dead, 250 hostages, 100 of whom are still captive, but also the Hezbollah attacks on northern Israel, forcing 70,000 Israelis to leave their houses. Additionally, there is also the Iran attacks, 13th of April, and the 1st of October, forcing millions of Israeli citizens to go into bomb shelters. We at the European Union, we have immediately and repeatedly condemned these attacks in the possible stronger terms, recognizing the Israel right and duty to defend and protect its citizens against any terrorist attacks. And I want to start with it, repeating it, because from time to time people consider that we don't say that enough. Well, we have to say it every time. Israel cannot look at the future without ensuring that these events will not happen again. On that, there is agreement. The second dimension is the fact that every right has a limit. Nobody has an unlimited right to do anything. Rights has limits, and the limits of rights are the rights themselves, are the law. And the right to defend has to be used on the limits of the international law and international humanitarian law. The inherent right to defend oneself against attacks has to be limited by this law. And here, the European Union, everybody says that. We agree. The right to defend has limits, and the limits are the limits of the international humanitarian law. The question is, has these limits been overpassed? That's the question. If there are limits, these limits have been overpassed, yes or not? We don't want to answer this embarrassing question. But when I hear the Defense Minister Gallant saying, I ordered a complete siege on the Gaza Strip, there will no electricity, no food, no fuel. Everything will be closed. They will be treated as animals. It certainly is obviously, it's evident that it goes further the right to defend. And when you listen to Kamala Harris, which is not being suspected of being a Zionist, anti-Zionist, saying yesterday in a tweet, on the last 2 weeks, no food has entered into Gaza. You listen to the United Nations saying that we are at the lowest level since the beginning of the war of the number of trucks crossing the border. It looks clear for me, at least, that the right to defend is one thing and the right to revenge is another thing. We cannot ignore the fact that the 7th of October was also the beginning of another tragedy and another horror, and one horror doesn't justify another horror. More than 40,000 Palestinians being killed in the course of Israel's military operations, maybe 100,000 injured, 60% of the buildings in the enclave destroyed. I mentioned Kamala Harris describing the situation. Almost the entire population of Gaza is displaced, malnourished, humanitarian access at the lower level, famine and disease spreading. Almost everything that makes the society function has been reduced to rubble. And these are facts. We are now increasingly seeing Israel replication, this conduct of war in the West Bank and Lebanon. The West Bank can become a second Gaza, and Gaza can become a second West Bank. And now even the Secretary General of the United Nations was warning that Lebanon can become a second Gaza. In the West Bank, which is under illegal occupation, and where illegal settlers have been spreading terror among local communities with total impunity, we are now witnessing Israeli airstrikes and the destruction of civilian infrastructure, as the bombing of the Tulkarem refugee camp the other day, killing 18 people, the deadliest airstrike in the occupied West Bank in the last 20 years. This disproportionate manner in which the Israeli forces has been operating in Gaza does not bode well with the protection of civilians, neither in the West Bank or in Lebanon. And this has to be also denounced, and it has to be stopped. The third dimension is the delivering of humanitarian assistance. We have been the biggest provider of humanitarian assistance, 330 million to Gaza in the last year. I don't want to tell the whole story, but there is a lot to tell. 60 flights of humanitarian airlift. Our civil protection unit has done for Gaza more than anyone else. However, this humanitarian aid has to be distributed on the ground. And UNRWA is the only United Nations agency able to provide essential services to millions of Palestinians in Gaza at the required scale. UNRWA is doing a lot of work, taking care of 650,000 children, paying a high bill, high toll of their staff being killed. And at the same time, in the Knesset, the banning of UNRWA is very alarming. If these bills passes and being approved, humanitarian response in Gaza will be so much weakened that the consequences will be catastrophic for the enclave and for the West Bank. Banning the very organization that ensures Palestinian refugees receive quality education and health care will worsen the already tense situation and having consequences not only for the Palestinians, but also for Israel and eventually for all of us. Yesterday at the Foreign Affairs Council, member states expressed their full support to UNRWA and asked the Commission to accelerate payments. So humanitarian support has to be increased. Someone told me it doesn't make sense to give a dinner to someone who is going to be killed tomorrow, but it's very important to provide humanitarian assistance. I've been in Rafah, and I've seen the more than 1,000 trucks waiting in the border, trying to cross the border. And I've seen also the big amount of things being rejected at the border because for one reason or another, they are considered dangerous. For example, a sleeping bag, green color, no, very dangerous. Or a trouser with medical equipment, with a small scissors, no, it's not, it's very dangerous. Or solar cells or purification water systems which contain some electronic components or carbon. No, this neither. It's not an anecdote. You can see warehouses and warehouses full with goods coming from Singapore, from South Africa, from Europe, being stocked there and not letting go where people are on need. Then the third dimension is the political solution for this conflict. We can provide humanitarian support, we have to ask for a ceasefire, but we have to go back to a political process in Gaza and in Lebanon, because no military action will bring a safe future for the people of the region. No military action can legitimate any solution. It can only be a political solution to the conflict. The conflict was caused by a political reason. We Europeans, we have a strong responsibility on the root causes of this conflict, so we should engage more on looking for a political solution. However, never before has been so little prospect for a political solution, I have to confess. Never before we have been talking as much about the problem and without having such a small, weak prospect for a political solution. And I want to thank all of you who are engaging your efforts in order to build bridges and to look for a way of getting not only a ceasefire, but a peace process. The tragedy is that we all know the parameters to solve the conflict, and the international community has backed these parameters many times. Overwhelmingly, the international community has been saying that they support the two-state solutions, one state for each people who are fighting for the same land. One state already exists, a strong state with an immense military and economic capacity. And you know, when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And you have the temptation to use the hammer. And the Middle East is full of cases where the hubris of unlimited military power has created havoc. The other state doesn't exist. Some people recognize its existence, but it's more a matter of will than reality. This solution, the only one that we know that could maybe bring peace, doesn't have the support of one of the most critical partners in the conflict, the Netanyahu government. It's not the first one. Before him, others were saying no to this solution. But he is presenting himself as the stronger resistance against the Palestinian state. This is also a fact, and we have to take that into account. But in September, on the sidelines of the last United Nations General Assembly, more than 100 members of the United Nations joined together to launch, under the chairmanship of Prince Faisal from Saudi Arabia and Foreign Affairs Minister of Norway, Espen Barth, a global alliance for the implementation of the two-state solution. We have been talking about it for more than 30 years, but doing not a lot to make it happen. Now we launch this global alliance as an umbrella under which each participant will contribute to incentivize the implementation of this solution with sticks and carrots. This will be another attempt to look for that happen. We will hold meetings in the next weeks, one in Riyadh, the following in Brussels, in order to foster the dialogue between the civil societies, between governments. On the 27th of October, we'll do a big event in Barcelona in the framework of the Union for the Mediterranean. And I know it may look naive at that moment of so much confrontation, so much pain, so much hate, to look possible to build bridges between the two people. But as Rabin told us, you don't make peace with friends, you make peace with enemies. You make peace with enemies that maybe tomorrow will no longer be enemies. Maybe not friends, but at least not enemies. And I think that the Europeans have a strong responsibility and also interest to help both people to move from mutual rejection, that's where we are today, mutual rejection, to mutual recognition. This is the purpose, mutual recognition. And the fifth dimension of our work on this year has been to avoid further regional escalation, without a lot of success, because regional escalation is happening every day. And let me say that we cannot abandon Lebanon. Lebanon was already deeply destabilized, and additionally, the Israeli invasion, it would be the fourth invasion, the fourth time that Israel invades Lebanon, has killed 2,500 people, has displaced 20% of the population, 1.2 million, 1.2 million, on the Israeli side 70,000, on the Lebanese side 1.2 millions, 400,000 escaped to Syria, and as Netanyahu himself has said, either you get rid of Hezbollah or I will turn you in a second Gaza. We have again mobilized money in humanitarian support, 40 million euros. This war will create enormous human suffering. It could spread to the whole region. We will continue working towards a ceasefire, but it seems that nobody is able to impose a ceasefire, not the US, not the European member states, not the Arabs. The bombing continues relentlessly. 1 moment ago, 40 more people being killed in Gaza. Yesterday, in a small town near the Lebanese border, 20 more. The Lebanese have to do their homework. Without a strong commitment to political reform from the Lebanese political class, there is no long-term solution for Lebanon. It is on them to take control. 2 years without being able to elect a president. This is time to elect the President of the Republic. I start a process which has been stalled for more than 2 years. And this is the direct responsibility of the political class in Lebanon. The Lebanese army must return to the southern Lebanon, according with the 1701 resolution, which, by the way, is 20 years old. It's only 20 years that we are asking for the implementation of this resolution. We are helping the Lebanese army through the European Peace Facility. And at the same time, we have to strongly condemn the shelling of on-field units by the Israeli Defense Forces. Accidental or not, this is completely unacceptable, as it is unacceptable the criticism to the Secretary General of the United Nations, asking him and blaming him for not withdrawing these United Nations troops. And they should know that the only one that could order the withdrawing of these troops is not the Secretary General, but the United Nations Security Council. And by the time being, the Security Council is not ready to ask for the withdrawal of these troops that provide this minimum guarantee of security for the people in the region as far as the war continues. Israel has to completely withdraw from the Lebanese territory. Each time they invaded Lebanon, 78, 82, 2000, 2006, they got tactical victories, but at the end of the day, they got strategic defeats. And Hezbollah was much more stronger after the 82 invasion than it was before. Even within Israel's own security establishment, many argue that these invasions not only fail to make Israel safer, they destabilize Israel's northern border and strengthen Hezbollah. What would make anybody believe that another military occupation will leave different results? I'm ending here because I think everything that I could say, I already said. History shows that there are no military solutions to the deeply rooted conflicts in the Middle East, not in Gaza, not in the West Bank, not in Lebanon. We have to avoid a full war between Israel and Iran. This could have dramatic consequences for the region and for the world. The Israel peace agreements with Jordan and Egypt has demonstrated that for decades that only peace brings security. But peace has to be done between all actors, not only between Israel and the Arab states. It has to be done between Israel and the Palestinians. Some days before the starting of the Hamas terrorist attacks and the war, someone was saying, I think it was Sullivan, the Middle East has never been so quiet. The Middle East has never been so peaceful. Why should you care about it? Well, it was a boiling bomb that one day or another was going to explode. It exploded, spreading, people being killed by tens of thousands, and putting the seeds of revenge for the future generations if we are unable to stop the spiral of violence. This will require dialogue. This will require a lot of human empathy, something that is completely missing today. The pain of the other is no longer taken into consideration. By the contrary, the more pain the other suffers, the better it looks like for you. And this is the recipe for catastrophe. So thank you for all of you who try to build bridges, to make the dialogue possible. Thank you to the Europeans who doesn't want to look to the other side, who want to look at the reality in front, and they are ready to condemn someone being killed in Gaza exactly with the same moral value that someone being killed in Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Borrell. We all know that you have to leave. Thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you. Good work. Good work.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, I'm happy now to start the first panel of our event with two important speakers from the region, Mr. Nasser Al-Kidwa, former Palestinian Foreign Minister, and Mr. Mossi Raz, former Knesset member for marriage. Mr. Al-Kidwa has been very active advocating for a sustainable Israeli-Palestinian peace, together with former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert. We would love to hear from you about this. Mr. Al-Kidwa, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all our friends. It's really a pleasure to be in the headquarters of the European Parliament, and to participate in such an important event organized by the S&D group in the Parliament. It was also a pleasure, a distinct pleasure, to hear Mr. Borrell speaking today, especially given the fact that the post might witness some changes. But this, I have to tell you, as friends, was one of my reasons why I wanted to be here, because I believe that he took courageous, appropriate positions with regard to the conflict, not only to help the Palestinian people, and not only to help the Israeli people, but to help all the peoples in the region, and I think as important, to help Europe as a whole to play its natural role with regard to such very important situation. So, thank you again for the opportunity. And let me start by saying that, as you all know, we do have a big problem in hand. And it seems that it's not getting better. Actually, it's getting worse, much worse. Only recently, we have witnessed shooting at UNIFIL officers, UNIFIL soldiers, including some European soldiers. We have witnessed the implementation of a clear decision to destroy UNRWA, one of the important organs of the United Nations. And we have seen, I don't know exactly how to call it, but escalation, to say the least, of war crimes and genocidal actions against Palestinians in northern Gaza. As if everything that happened until now in Gaza was not enough, so we are seeing increasing intensity of such criminality in northern Gaza. Now, you can add that to what's happening in Lebanon, whether in the south or in Beirut as well, and God knows where the whole story might stop. Because in reality, Mr. Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, and his government do not want to stop. They want to continue because at least the Prime Minister sees it fit, sees it something beneficial to him personally for this war to continue as a way to avoid accountability before the Israeli courts and before the Israeli public. Now, I don't want to go on this front, and I want more to tell you at least something about the initiative that our chairman referred to. The joint proposal that we made, Mr. Ehud Olmert and myself, with regard to the conflict. First, I have to say that we did not present any complete initiative. We did not attempt to present any complete plan. We presented, as I said, a proposal related to three very important aspects of the conflict. The overall political solution, the necessity to stop the war in Gaza and how to do that, the future of Jerusalem as a very important city to the whole international community. But in addition, we also called on the people in office to negotiate the additional remaining very important issues as well. Issues such as settlements, settlers, refugees, additional security measures, etc., etc. Because only people in office have the credibility and have the power to negotiate fully all the details and to present actually a comprehensive plan to be implemented. We saw our job as politicians, as leaders, to raise our voice and say what is happening is wrong, what is happening cannot lead to a better future, and we need to change course. We need to change course by declaring the right path and by calling on everybody, whether the public on both sides or governments, relevant governments in the region and beyond, to support that. Now let me tell you a little bit about the three issues I referred to. And let me begin by stopping the war in Gaza as the urgent matter that we need to achieve. In this regard, we recalled, of course, the vision presented by President Joseph Biden, which he said enjoyed the support of the Israeli government, a vision that was incorporated in Security Council Resolution 2713, I think, something like that, which means, to avoid any misunderstanding, which means that Israeli hostages have to be freed, the agreed number of Palestinian prisoners have to be released, both while we have a ceasefire as an important step that need to be taken. And then it means the Israeli withdrawal from Gaza, and it means the establishment of governmental structure. And in this regard, we did propose the establishment of a transitional Council of Commissioners for Gaza Strip. Now, in our discussion with some officials, someone said, well, we support the Palestinian government to be responsible for both West Bank and Gaza Strip. Of course, great. Let's have this. We have no problem with that. But this is the minimum as we see it. The minimum that there should be a Palestinian governmental structure responsible for rebuilding Gaza and re-establishing the security there. And in this regard, we also proposed the presence of an Arab interim security presence, which is slightly different than an international force. We do believe that the latter has no future. Why? Because the US will not put boots on the ground, not only this administration, any other administration, and consequently, the friends of the United States will not put boots on the ground. And consequently, the United States, the UN Security Council is not going to adopt the plan, and we will be all stuck. So we thought the easier path would be an interim Arab security presence. And we use the word presence, not force, intentionally, knowing the difference, because there will be no military task given to this presence. It will help the Palestinian security force to stabilize the situation in Gaza, while also make sure that no military attacks against Israel is happening out of Gaza. This, I personally believe, should be happened in a political manner, not in a fighting manner, in a political manner that would ensure that this is going to be the situation. But you know, things are interrelated in the Middle East. For instance, when we speak about an interim Arab security presence, we all know that there are requirements for that, political as well as practical requirements. I'll talk only about the political requirements. These are two. If we want an Arab security presence, we know that we need to fulfill two requirements. One, an Israeli commitment for withdrawal from Gaza without return, and two, the Israeli commitment to the state of Palestine on 1967 borders. This will ensure that while the Israeli forces are withdrawing, there is an Arab presence that takes its place. And then the second issue second point is the overall political solution. And in this regard, of course, we affirm that it should take the form of two states, Israel and Palestine, living side by side in peace. They do mutually recognize each other. And this should happen, more importantly, on the basis of 1967 borders. We did agree to accept the proposal made by Mr. Olmert during his tenure, that is the land swap of 4.4% of the territory of the West Bank. It's being understood, while it is not there in the document, but it's being understood that the most important part for Israel will be the area around Jerusalem, with its settlers and settlements that will be incorporated in the 4.4%. While for the Palestinian side, the most important will be the passage, the safe passage linking the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. The third issue is Jerusalem, as I said, and in this regard, we accepted the notion that there will be an Israeli Jerusalem and there will be a Palestinian Jerusalem, basically on the line of what was proposed by President Clinton in Clinton parameters. And then we also propose that the old city with its religious places should be placed under a trusteeship of 5 countries, 5 governments, of which Israel and Palestine should be part. So you have Israel and Palestine and other 3 members to be agreed upon through negotiations. We didn't get into that, although we mentioned something about the important role, the historic important role that was played by the King of Jordan in this regard. So you might understand from that that Jordan might be one of the 5 countries that are proposed. And we stopped there. We stopped there. In a way, I believe it's very important because it legitimizes further discussion of the idea of partitioning the land into 2 states, and it put the existence of the state of Palestine back on the international agenda in a legitimate way. Now, does this have the prospect of moving ahead? I want to be very clear with you and tell you frankly that as long as Mr. Benjamin Netanyahu is the Prime Minister of Israel, nothing is going to move. Nothing is going to move. And what we propose is not about today. It's about tomorrow. Because sooner or later, the 2 peoples will find out that wars, blood, tears, and agony is simply not the way forward. And at the end of the day, we need to have some kind of understanding. We need to have a dialogue. We need to have discussion. We need to have agreement on coexistence and on the way to live together, and this through the existence of 2 states. This is, I think, Mr. Borrell said that, this is the only real solution, possible solution. All other ideas are either fantasy or a recipe for further bloodshed. You choose. Daniel, you choose which one. Either a recipe for bloodshed or fantasy that has nothing to do with realities on the ground. So as such, I think we did our share. Now we want to see the share of the public, and I think they will be positive. I do believe that. and we want to see the share of relevant governments. We want to see the share of Europe. This is the time to take positions, clear positions that are unambiguous, that they are straightforward, that they are strong enough to push things forward, and indeed to help achieving lasting and permanent peace in the Middle East. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Al-Kidwa. Now I would like to give the floor to Mossi Raz, former Knesset member from Meretz and Secretary General of Peace Now, as well as Director of the non-profit organization Jerusalem. Mr. Raz, you have the floor.
Thank you. Good afternoon. First, I want to thank you, the organizers, to issue. I think it's extremely important. Okay, now? Extremely important, and please do that more. Bring here together Israelis and Palestinians who basically agree between them more or less about what my friend Dr. Nasser Al-Kidwa has said. In the last year, the deterioration, the escalation of the last year started in October 7 with the brutal attack of the terrorist organization Hamas, massacre of people, kids, adults in their homes, raping men and women, Israelis and not Israelis from 18 nationalities, Europeans, Americans, Israeli Muslim citizens and Israeli Jewish citizens. Even now, it is going on, this atrocity, by the fact that in an illegal way, as a war crime, Hamas still has hostages, among them Israelis, but not only Israelis, Jewish and Muslim Israelis, among them a 1-year-old kid, 86-year-old person, at least 2 members of my party, a part of this Social Democrat party. In October 8, started the atrocities in the north by the attack of the Hezbollah terror organization sending missiles to Israel. And then started the war, and even in the war we see crimes, and every war should be according to the international law. It is not that I support wars. I prefer without war at all. But if we have war, it has to be according to the international law, and it must end. I want to say here, in the beginning of my words, I want to mention the Palestinian citizens of Israel. We don't talk about them because we talk about Israelis and we talk about Palestinians. The Palestinian citizens of Israel suffer a lot in the last year. They had to be loyal to their nationality, to their Palestinian nationality, and they had to be national to their state, Israel. Tens of them were killed by the Hamas, others were killed by Hezbollah. And they were loyal, 99.9% of them were loyal both to their nationality and both to their state and both to the truth and to morality. And this is exactly what our social democratic family should do. We should not be divided. We should not be pro-Palestine or pro-Israel. We should be pro-peace, pro-human rights, pro-Palestine, and pro-Israel. This is exactly what we should do, and I hope this is what we are doing today. First, I agree with my friend, Dr. Nasser Al-Kidwa. We have to bring this war to an end. And in bringing this war to an end, we have to reach today, like we demonstrate in Israel. We have demonstrations every day, but large demonstrations every Friday. עכשיו, now. We have to have a deal for releasing the hostages, ending the war, and yes, releasing agreed number of Palestinian prisoners and agreed names. It's not easy, but this is a thing that we must do now. And we have to make, I think that the international community should let the world know exactly what are the problems with the government of Israel and what are the problems with the Hamas, who is not agreeing and in what, in order to make pressure on both of them to agree to this deal. But of course, this deal is not ending the occupation. This deal is not ending the hostility. And we want to go on to a peace treaty between the two nations. And I fully support the proposal of Dr. El-Kidwa and Prime Minister Olmert. This is an example, of course. The agreement can be a little bit different, like the Geneva Initiative, following the Arab League Peace Initiative. We all know what we talk about. We just have to make it, and it's not easy. I want to tell you that I support the two-state solution not out of ideology. My ideology is securing human rights. My ideology is peace. My ideology is equality. I support two-state solution because this is the best pragmatic way to serve this goal of human rights, of security for both nations, and for dignity for everybody. This is why I support this two-state solution. But not only that, I am Zionist. And in the charter, in the first Zionist Congress, 1897, the Zionist Congress said, what is the goal of the Zionist movement? And they declare the goal of the Zionist movement is to implement the right of the Jewish people for self-determination according to Mishpat HaKol. This is Hebrew. This what there was no international law by then, but this is we should be called today international law. So according to the international law, we have the right for self-determination. And according to the international law, the Palestinians have the same right. This comes out of my Zionism. Not only that, according to the international laws, the borders between us are clear. We know them. Everybody knows them. It was mentioned earlier. 67 borders with sweep of lands. And I support the two-state solution not only because I am Zionist and not only because moral reasons, but I support two-state solution because this is the only solution who can bring peace. It can bring security to Israel. Israel had to go to many wars. Some of them were launched by our neighbors, some of them launched by Israel, but we never got security out of those wars. We do have security in two fronts of Israel. This security that we have in the Egyptian border is an outcome of a peace treaty, and the Jordanian border, an outcome of a peace treaty. And this is exactly what we have to do with the Palestinians. Yes, I agree with Dr. El-Kidwa. It's not going to happen when Netanyahu is prime minister, but it's hard to believe Netanyahu is not here forever. Yes, he was elected as prime minister first, more than 28 years ago. Enough is enough. Enough is enough, and I hope that this is his last term. And then we have to go to this reconciliation between the two nations, and not only those two nations, all the nations in the area, all the Arab nations. Together, we have to do that. Make peace between Israel and the Arab nations without forgetting the Palestinians. And this, what I want to ask our social democratic family, not to forget the hostages and their families, not to forget the kids who suffer right now in Gaza, not to forget the suffer of Israelis, Palestinians, and Lebanese, and help to build together this vision that I think we spoke about and we agree in 99% between us, and I think many Israelis and many Palestinians agree with us, and I think that if your proposal, Dr. El-Kidwa, will be presented by Israeli Prime Minister and Palestinian President, the nations will accept that. We can do that, and please help us to do that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Raz. Now we will pass to the next stage. We will start a Q&A session among the members of S&D. And please, let's be brief and concise, everybody, in order to have time for the second panel. We will start with Evin. Evin, excuse me. We will start only with questions, and then the speakers will answer to all of them.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thanks to our guests, Mr. Al-Kudwa and Mr. Raz, for being here with us and sharing your perspectives. My name is Evin Inser, member of the European Parliament, doing my second term from Sweden, and the Social Democratic Party, of course, from Sweden. I've been working and been engaged in the Israeli-Palestinian issue for a long time, since the youth movement beginning of 2000. And unfortunately, we see an escalation. It's getting worse and worse and worse. And the last years also, what is kind of interesting, and I will come to the questions also, of course, is that the far-right movements here in the European Union, as well as the far-right parties in Israel, is cooperating very, very closely. And of course, the far-right parties here in the European Parliament, as well as around the European Union, plays the friends of Israel. But what they do here in our union, it's very clear. It's anti-Semitic forces who have understood one thing, that they need to cooperate across the countries with each other to reach their far-right ideology. But that means that we who believe in democracy, rule of law, international law, needs to become even better on this cooperation and not take for granted that we have always believed in that, we have always been working with that, and let them run before us. And I see, when I see globally, how these forces has paradoxically been strengthening their cooperation with each other. So therefore, I'm very thankful for all the inputs that you have been sharing with us and your perspectives. I would like to first start with the first question on the proposal and the initiative that you, Mr. Al-Kudwa, and Mr. Olmert proposed, have put on the table. How has it been welcomed by different actors? Of course, actors in the European Union, as well as in the Middle East and of course beyond. So how has it been welcomed? And also among the population in Israel and Palestine, how is the state of feeling for and believe in the two-state solution? When I go to Israel and Palestine, which I have done the last years 40, 50 times, I more and more hear that the two-state solution is in the past, and there needs to be another solution forward. And of course, as a social democrat, when I'm asked the question, what do you think, what do you believe in, I still stick to the two-state solution, because as you rightly said, that is right now the most reasonable proposal on the table. But if we then stick to the two-state solution, how will we ensure that it will be according to the 67 borders when we look at the expansion of the settlements that has been taking place for so long time? And the Palestinian Authority has just been controlling a few percentage of those 22% that 67 borders is putting the line of Palestine. And then, of course, I also agree on that we shouldn't have wars, but also wars when they appear have lost. So Israel, Iran, Hamas, Hezbollah, nobody is above international law. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you both for the people, for the speaker who have reminded us a very important detail that some of them we don't even know. I mean, unless we are covering every day Middle East. The peace plan, the proposal you have done was significant, and in fact, as already produced Mr. Kedwa, a change. There is a prime minister who is a technical prime minister in West Bank, but I have the feeling, and this is my question, that somehow the four nations who are running the talk on peace process have been requisitioning those peace process. I'm talking about the fact that it's very close group, the one that Doha and the rest, American in particular, I think, and this is not an anti-American thing. I think the fact that this proposal has been given to the hand of four head of the intelligence of four countries that are still very important, somehow have put the talk about about the Middle East out of the reach of Europe. Europe has been, in a way, I think, not given a role in those peace process talk, and I want to know your opinion if it's true or if it's not true, because I think Europe has to start from scratch. To Mr. Ras, I think it was very important what you said, reminding the aspect of democracy still running and running very strong in this crisis. Because Israel, there is not one Israel. There is one government or another government, but there is Israel that has done with it's part of, its own people. This thing, though, has a profound limit. And the limit is that this peace process is, once again, in the hand of a very strict committee. Four people of the head of intelligence of the four countries are running also this. So while I think that you're right, saying that agreements are done among people, not among head of this. So all this related to the issue of Europe. Is Europe really a chance, and which one do you ask from Europe, so in a way to be active on this peace process?
Thank you very much, Lucia. And Chloe?
Yes, thank you very much, Yanis, and thank you to you both for being here. It gives us a lot of hope, I think, to see people like you from both sides not giving up on peace and justice. So thank you for being here. My question, I have two short questions. The first one relates to Evan's ones on the actuality of, the two-state solution, because we hear that this is a solution, from the past, and now the society both society has evolved. Palestinians don't want like a small a state that is not even, guaranteed in its territorial continuity. And we know that in Cisjordania you have also the problem of Israeli settlements and people that cannot actually be moved given the amount of people there. So, do you believe in the old two-state solution, the frontiers of 1977? It is our position, huh? But do you really believe in it? And what do you think of solutions, for instance, pushed forward by an NGO called A Land for All, which is like seems to be very ambitious plan, like a confederation with freedom of movement, etc., etc. First question. Second one, how can you mobilize and take some strength from the civil society in both your countries? Because we can see in Israel, I mean, since the 7th of October, a society which seems to refuse to see the reality of Palestinians, who have no empathy anymore for Palestinians. And we can see the strength of a far-right movement with Smotrich and Ben-Gvir. But we can also see movement like Standing Together, organizing big demonstrations in the streets of Tel Aviv. How can you contain the far right in Israel? How can you make people see that their security will come from the liberation of Palestinians? And in Palestine, I mean, it's the same. How can you both work for having a society, civil society behind you? Because we know that Yasser Arafat and Yitzhak Rabin, the fact that the peace solution failed, it's because of extremism within civil society in the first place. So what can you say about this? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chloe. Mr. Al-Kidwan, do you want to start answering?
Yes, thank you very much. In all frankness, neither Mr. Olmert, I think, nor I am, are really could be described as peaceniks. We're not. I'm not an old negotiator, and I don't know what this kind of slogans. I am someone who wants to serve the national interest of the Palestinian people as I see fit. And I think Mr. Olmert is more or less the same thing. I don't want to speak on his behalf, but I think we are trying to do what we believe is good for our peoples, irrespective of anything else, just by way of clarification. Now, the first question, how the proposal was received. Well, I think in terms of the public, most of the public, if not the overwhelming majority of the public, are silent. And I took this as a positive position. Because honestly, the people on both sides are tired, but they are also taken by their leaders to the idea of, okay, we'll teach them, we'll show them what we can do. So the fact that the majority are silent is indicative, I think. And I believe that the moment they see some real promise, something tangible, they will go for it, as Mr. Raz was saying. Had this proposal been presented by the Prime Minister of Israel and the President of Palestine, probably the overwhelming majority would have applauded, would have followed. So until now, it's like that, and I'll leave the rest, the governments, to the second question. Now, later on, the same colleague went on to at the end, to wonder about the settlements, the future of settlements. First, let me make one thing clear. The existence of settlements, or the big number of settlers, does not make them legal. They are illegal, and they will remain illegal, and they have to go as a matter of principle. And nevertheless, if we can find solutions, we will implement solutions. And I think that part of our proposal, the agreement on the 4.4% of the land swap, is something that could solve 75 to 80% of the problem. because as I said, it's being understood that most of the 4.4 of the territory that will be annexed to Israel will be in and around the area of Jerusalem, where most of the settlers are present. Now, if you want to ask me specifically about the settlers and the settlements and what about the rest, well, I can, but this is personal, this is not in the proposal. I can speak of a preparatory period with commitment to the two states a priori from the beginning. Let's make this clear. We need to learn from the experience of Oslo. One of the mistakes was that we did not agree on the end result from the beginning. So we need to commit to the end result, but nevertheless, there should be, in my opinion, a preparatory period. I don't want to use the term used before in the Oslo processes, and that should include a clear proviso on the complete freeze of settlement activities and the freeze on all governmental assistance to settlements, which will lead practically to shrinking of the settlement, shrinking of the project. The last part, I keep it now for myself, but I do have some ideas that could be negotiated later on. Your second, actually, question was about whether this two states is behind us and whether there is other proposals, and linked to that, there is the question about Mr. Dajani's ideas and stuff like this. Listen, with all sincerity, there is no other solution. There is the hallucination of one-state solution. There is nothing called one-state solution because by definition, the first part contradicts the second part. Solution means compromise, means agreement, means coexistence, means cooperation. One state means the total victory of one side over the other. If the Israelis win, they will achieve greater Israel and the Palestinians will become some slaves, irrespective of the hallucination about rights. And what rights? What rights? Look to the East Jerusalemites. They are not even nationals. Is East Jerusalem territory annexed to Israel? They didn't use the term annexation, precisely to avoid treating those people as nationals of the state of Israel. They are not nationals. They have ID as residents of the states. So you can imagine what would happen with the rest in this case. If the Palestinians win, they will dismantle, we will dismantle the institutions of the state, and we will build instead and set new institutions of the democratic Palestine instead. But that's going to be a totally different situation. Totally different situation. So it doesn't exist. I know that some liberals, whether liberals Jews or liberals Israelis or whatever, might support this. You know why, in reality? Because they are good people, because they believe in human rights. They believe that Palestinians have rights that needs to be respected. And nevertheless, they don't dare to say that those settlers, those Jews, do not have the right to settle in the West Bank. And they have to leave. They cannot do that. They can't say that. So what's the solution? The solution is one state. You remove the line. You remove the applicability. You cancel the applicability of Geneva Convention. You cancel the illegality of settlements. And everybody lives together in happiness and, for better future. Doesn't exist. There will not be happiness. There will not be a better future. Hatred will remain, and contradiction will remain, and killing will continue, and will we will not have an end of this story. Something similar could be said to the other idea, two states in one land, or two peoples in one land, or something like this. I read it carefully, but I forgot about it later. I read it in Arabic, I discussed it in Arabic, and there are different versions, by the way. There are different versions of this. So it's not serious. Now, I could accept the ideas for someone that, okay, two states, but then we need to think of the relationship between the two states. What's the form of relationship? In this regard, for instance, the notion of freedom of movement, total freedom of movement, is nonsense. Here is Mr. Raz, ask him. They don't want, the Israelis don't want to see one Gazans until further notice. Maybe this will change in 20, 30 years, who knows? But now it's not possible. It's not possible. Nevertheless, we might find some arrangements in relation to, let's say, 20, 30,000 or whatever, something like that, on the basis of parity, reciprocity. We can manage the relationship. Many aspects of the relationship needs to be negotiated and organized. We need to, for instance, settle the economic relationship in a better way, not the stupid Paris Agreement that exists now. We have to do many things. So in this regard, yes, we can always find better solutions with regard to the relationship between the two states. But the idea, the basic idea, is the right of both sides to their own states. Right to self-determination and national independence. I can say now, and everybody, if wants to be angry, it's his or her right. I do not accept the notion that Israel gives the Palestinian side their state. It's not like that. We have the natural and historic right, like any other people in the world. We have the right to our states that already exist, by the way, by virtue of Resolution 181, by virtue of the decision taken by the PNC in '82, by virtue of the historic rights of the Palestinian people as the indigenous people of the land, you name it. But we accept 1967 resolution as a basis with some modification, agreed upon modification. We said in the neighborhood of 4.4% of the territory of the West Bank. Now, the second question about why this was given to, I don't know, intelligence. Well, that's not true. I haven't met any heads of intelligence, neither Arab or non-Arabs, haven't. I know that in some Arab countries, the intelligence is the party that takes care of the question of Palestine, and probably they know it, and it's good that they know it, but I can tell you this. The first party that was given the paper, the proposal, was Joseph Borrell in his office, before it was formally announced.
Mr. Al-Kidwa, this is the fact that this discussion is in the hand of the four head of the intelligence, the four nations that are discussing. It's public news. It's not something that have been, having under the
Later
table.
on, it became public.
Excuse me?
Later on, it became public. Before it is announced, the proposal was given to Mr. Joseph Borrell
Well,
in
that's
his
clearly
office.
that there is a political things, but the story is that this things is run by the head of the four nations involved with
I'm
it.
telling you, it's not true.
But
I definitely, I
to-
don't think that
that's fine,
Mr.
we take
Olmert
it.
met with anybody of the head. Maybe.
So this is not a wrong information because, I'm a journalist, so I would like not to be denied. Anyway,
Anyway,
the question is that I think that this peace, this initiative for peace, is in the end just too few nations. One of the reasons why Europe has not been effective is because, in fact, the circle of discussion is very small. I wanted to know if you have this perception, and I want to know also if Mr. Ras has this perception.
Well, we are
the
trying.
circle of discussion is so small. You see
We
it
are
like
trying
this.
to do our best to overcome this. While I don't like, for instance, to speak about things that have not happened, I can tell you that tomorrow we are going to Rome with the idea, we requested an audience with His Holiness, and he's going to grant it, probably. And that would be a very important step forward. Some other foreign ministers, same thing. So we did not stop moving around and trying to, present the proposal and trying to build support for it. Because we understand, we hope that we'll reach the United States, for instance, not only Europe. But we understand the importance of Europe, and we are trying our best to mobilize the European position in the right way, in spite of whatever that didn't happen or did happen during the last year. And the story, okay, maybe Daniel gave us an explanation. The story of the 4 heads of intelligence, neither Olmert nor I met with any of them. None of the 4. The only Arab official that we met with was the foreign ministers of the United Arab Emirates in Abu Dhabi. And it was long meeting. That's it. No one else at all. Now, we would have hoped to meet with more Arabs and to have meetings with some Arab officials before the announcement, because that would have helped us doing certain things. Unfortunately, it didn't happen, but I think we will compensate with that. There are ideas now about collective meetings with some ministers, either Europeans or Arabs, and how to do that and where. I don't want to get into the details again, because I don't want to speak about things that did not happen yet. But your point is right one in terms of the principle that we have to work in an even-handed way, trying to mobilize the necessary support in Europe and in the Arab world and in the West generally. That we agree, and we are trying to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Ras.
Thank you. First, to the question about, I took all the questions together here. 1 state, 2 states, 10 states. I stayed at the beginning. The ideology, the goal is to secure the rights of everybody, Palestinians, Israelis. And it could have been 1 state or 2 states or even 10 states. But the 2-state solution is the only one who provides these human rights and the right for self-determination of both nations. Now, it's when I say that, 1 state we have now. There is 1 state. I think Mr. Borrell said that. Then when I talk to colleagues, most of them Palestinians, but some Israelis too, and they say 1 state, then I ask them, okay, and what? They say democracy, 1 person, 1 vote. And then I ask them, what about the right of return? So they say, if they are Palestinians, they would say, no, there is right of return, but 1 person, 1 vote. But I tell them, but maybe majority doesn't like it. No, this is a condition. This is a condition that the Israelis will not accept. So I don't see it happens after so many years of war. Maybe in 100 years from now, but not now. But I do think that we have to be very flexible when we talk about this 2-state solution. We had the Geneva Initiative. It was 20 years ago, 21 years ago. We have your proposal, not initiative, okay? Your proposal, which is actually take into consideration what was asked here about settlements. Because while in Geneva, the swap is 2.2%, you say neighborhood of 4.4. You doubled it. So if you do that, you take 100% land in the occupied territories for settlement, and okay, you should be compensated about that. So we take that into consideration, and I can think about other ideas how to deal with the settlements, and I say they didn't have the right to go to settle there from the beginning, and they don't have the right now. But still, I have to deal with the fact that 700,000 Israelis, if I include East Jerusalem, live in those settlements east to the Green Line. So I have to deal with that, and I don't have the power, even if we have peace, to deport 700,000 or to dismantle 700,000, and this is exactly why you and Geneva Initiative and the Arab League Initiative, by the way, took that into consideration, say, okay, we can have swap. Now, for the idea of one land for all, I don't think it's ridiculous. I think this is an idea that we all the time should talk about. If both sides agree, I'm not sure that both sides agree. I see why it's a little bit problematic to Dr. El-Kidwa, and I see why it's a little bit problematic to the Israelis. On the other hand, they bring some nice suggestions that we have to talk we have to think about them. Maybe we have to take part of them. I don't know. One of the problems is, and I say it here very frankly, that if you say the settlers stay, then you give legitimization to the settlement process that is happening all the time. With the encouragement of the Israeli government, with the initiative of the Israeli government, and with the funding of the Israeli government. I've heard just now that the UK decided to sanction Amanat, the movement that is building in the settlement. This is important, I think, important move, but there are other movements, and I'm not sure that they care about UK. Yes, I'm not sure. So maybe they will have 1 or 2% drop in their donations, maybe even the opposite. I don't know. But yes, we have to deal with that, and this is part of our way to confront the far right here in this parliament, in the Knesset in Jerusalem. We have with all the differences between them, of course, we have to confront them. And for me, a racist is not pro-Israel. I don't want racists to be pro-Israel. Not want them to be pro-Palestine, not want them to be pro-Israel. They are racist. And I don't care if they are anti-Semitized or Islamophobe or they hate I don't know whom. A racist is not pro-Israel, for me. I think that the civil society is extremely important. There was a question about that, standing together, doing excellent work. I had the privilege to speak in their demonstrations again and again. The fact that we see many Israelis in the streets every Saturday night, by the way, I don't think that in the history of the democratic world, we saw so many people going to the streets so many times every week in so many places around the state. But the main reason is to promote a deal, to release the hostages. We have to be very frank. Yes, we hear many people say end the war, but this is not the main idea of the struggle. Now, about Europe, I'm not sure that I understood your question. I think that Europe is extremely important. Europe, exactly like I said about the social democratic, should be pro-Palestine, pro-Israel, and pro-peace, and pro-human rights, and maybe nominate somebody to deal with that. I don't know whom, because the famous people are either not supported by Israel or by Palestine or by both. So we have to find somebody else. And one of the things that is very important, the one who will be able to help to achieve deal for releasing hostages and prisoners and ending the war will got a lot of sympathy, I'm sure among Israelis, I guess among Palestinians too. And then this person can help in moderating between two sides towards a peace treaty in the future, not under Netanyahu. So it's very important, but I cannot tell you whom. I don't know. But of course, Europe has a lot to do here and a lot of thinking to do in this issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I want to thank our two speakers. Now we will pass up the our second panel. Since I have to participate at the Bureau meeting, please, Nacho, please have the floor and call our next speakers.
Yes, Daniel. Thank you, colleagues and guests. Let's continue after this refreshing panel in which we heard, again, we are more important than we think. The European Union has a role to play, and sometimes we fall in this, let's say, pessimistic situation. The European Union is completely absent, and we have some pieces of information in this is not the case. And I'm happy to hear from our guests, not from ourselves. We are going to the second panel. We are having, this is because we are having a web participation. Then we are starting with Daniel Levy, isn't it? Yeah. Daniel, you are a regular, you are a presence, very regular presence in the European Union. Daniel has been, is the president of the U.S. Middle East Project, is linked to ECFR, and was a negotiator of the main processes on negotiation on the Middle East conflict. You have the floor, because later we're having a connection with our second guest. Daniel, go ahead.
Thank you so much, Nacho, and to the S&D group for putting this together and for putting the lights out. I want to share 5 thoughts with you. And the first one is just to acknowledge the moment we are in, which is after a year of failing to achieve a ceasefire, but the main actor in this, the United States, seemingly saying, but at least we have prevented broader regional contagion. That's not where we are. It was clear to anyone paying attention that you could not de-escalate the region without getting a ceasefire in Gaza. And unfortunately, the efforts to get a ceasefire in Gaza have been woefully inadequate. I would probably say pathetic. And now we are closer than ever. In fact, we are in a broader regional contagion. The only question is how far into the abyss this will go. The only way we're going to stop the killing in Gaza, the only way you're going to get the Israelis who are held in Gaza home, the only way you're going to get the desperately needed aid in, but also the only way you're going to be able to get a regional de-escalation is to double down on Gaza efforts, and I want to come back to that. But I do just want to note that it is terrifying to see the same callous disregard for civilian life being displayed against Lebanon by the Israeli Defense Forces and the Israeli leadership, as has been visited upon Gaza. I don't have a crystal ball. I can have some analysis on what might happen next on the Israel-Iran front, but I don't want to focus on that. I want to say two things on this. First of all, we are hearing again things that we have heard in the past, the fantasies, and they're not just confined to neoconservatives, of how we can remake the Middle East. We'll do regime change in Iran, and we'll do regime change in Lebanon, and we'll finish doing a regime change in Syria. And this isn't to say that there couldn't be much better regimes across a vast part of the region and beyond. But doing them with 2,000-pound Israeli bombs is not what's going to make things better. Benjamin Netanyahu went to the US Congress in 2002 and he told them, you do a war in Iraq and the whole region will be so much more wonderful. I don't need to remind anyone how that ended. What I should remind people, though, is that there was a European forward-leaning effort on regional diplomacy that created a lot of the backdrop to the eventual nuclear deal with Iran. If people remember, it was the E3, and it was one of Borrell's predecessors, Javier Solana, came from a very similar background, who laid the groundwork for that later success, and Europe needs to be back in the business of proactive diplomacy. My second point is about the events of October 7th, the Israeli-Palestinian expanse and what has happened subsequently. We have heard from other speakers about Israel's right to self-defense. I would go further than that. The Israeli state has the responsibility and the first primary duty to provide security for its citizens. The Palestinians have the right to resist a belligerent, illegal military occupation. Both of those things, Palestinian resistance and Israeli defense of its civilians, have to be done within the frame of international law. That's why we have international law. That's why there are rules which even frame the conduct of war. The right to resist does not include a right to kill civilians. Holding the pain of Israelis after October 7th very quickly had to transition to also simultaneously trying to prevent what was being visited upon Palestinians, because as has been said here already, on day 2, the intention to commit a war crime was announced by the Israeli Minister of Defense to cut all food, fuel, water, and electricity. Defense cannot be revenge, and revenge cannot be violations of the Genocide Convention or war crimes. Hence, the urgent measures called for by the International Court of Justice in the South Africa case and the request for arrest warrants by the Chief Prosecutor of the ICC. And permanent war will not bring security. And I just want to simply say the following. Anyone who thinks what is being done to the Palestinians is just, or is even primarily, just as in the only, is only or even primarily about guaranteeing Israeli security has not been paying attention either to the actions or the publicly stated intentions of the Israeli leadership. This is a political project. One can only make sense of the scorched earth and destruction being visited on Gaza, and not just on Gaza, okay? Pay attention to what's happening in the West Bank. As we move from city to city and we see infrastructure destroyed, this is about making these territories uninhabitable to Palestinians. Displacement, finishing the Nakba, as some Israelis leaders say openly, is something discussed. And it is so dangerous because when you go into a zero-sum place, it's very hard to get out of. And I would argue that, of course, this is hell for Palestinians, but Israel is digging itself deeper into a hole, and more Israeli vulnerabilities in terms of how is Israel absorbable in this region are being exposed. And right now, pay attention to what's happening in northern Gaza. You may not know the names of Israeli new security thinkers like Gershon HaKohen or Yaakov Amidror, but they have spoken about clearing northern Gaza permanently. I want to use my other comments to talk, maybe raise some thoughts about here, the body I'm in now, the European Parliament, and the role of Europe. Because my third point is that Europe faces an unprecedented crisis and security crisis in your own hinterland, in Europe. And this is happening at a time of desperately fragile global institutions, a fragile global framework, a fluidity as we shift towards multipolarity. International law is being challenged as never before. And as Iracha earlier from this podium said, we must ask ourselves, how does this look to the rest of the world? When we claim that we are upholding a rules-based system in one place, and it's nowhere to be seen in another. The president of your own commission spoke less than a week ago in very bold terms to a leader of a European member state, as Ursula von der Leyen scolded this gentleman regarding his stance on the atrocities we are all witnessing. And yet her stance on the atrocities we are all witnessing makes Europe weaker and more endangered on the international stage, supporting, running cover for those atrocities. It's not my job to advise the incoming HRVP, who will replace Josep Borrell, and she is not from this political grouping. But if I were to offer friendly advice, it would be that if you want to maintain any European credibility, which the gentleman we heard earlier, Josep Borrell, has faced an uphill struggle in doing over this last year, then you would be well advised to take very seriously how the rest of the world views European positionality on this question. Don't be surprised when in the EU GCC summit in this town tomorrow, those states turn around and say, what now? What do you want us to say on this other situation on your doorstep? There's a situation on our doorstep. What are you doing about that? It's very sad to hear, I mean, it's very honest, but it's very sad to hear the acknowledgement of European irrelevance during this crisis. Irrelevant on the ceasefire front, irrelevant in plotting a future. But the irrelevance, as others have said, is not a decree from heaven. The irrelevance is a self-imposed thing because the leverage exists, the tools exist. And let's just acknowledge there is an asymmetry of power in the Israel-Palestine situation, and therefore this is primarily about using that leverage with Israel, with whom you have the most extensive trade relations, including trade in weapons, you have an association agreement, etc. My final word on this is what this has done to the United Nations. A United Nations agency is in the midst of having legislation passed in the Israeli Knesset, designating it a terrorist organization. That's UNRWA. That same organization is apparently facing the confiscation of its offices in Jerusalem in order to build an illegal settlement. The UN Secretary General has been PNG'd. 11 out of the EU member states chose not to sign a letter protesting this move against the Secretary General. UNIFIL troops, many contributing member countries here. It's interesting, we're hearing this, they're being used as human shields. That's familiar to me from somewhere. That led to the killing of 40,000 Palestinians, and still counting. My fourth point is this, specifically for this body, and it's simply to urge you as a group not to fall into the trap of some of what others may throw at you, and not to waste your time and your taxpayers' money, and to ridicule things that I believe should be considered ridiculous. If anyone turns round and says, we've got to get tough about those Palestinian textbooks, have you been watching these self-incriminating postings of 18, 19, 20-year-old IDF soldiers? I wonder what kind of a school system they were in until a couple of weeks earlier. It's amazing to watch the proceedings of the International Court of Justice in the South Africa genocide case, because virtually all of the evidence is self-incriminating from the Israeli side. Look into Israel Channel 14. Mossi will be very familiar with this, and the request for an investigation by the Israeli state prosecutor, I think it was, by the former leader of your party and others, Zahava Galon, in the incitement being spread by Channel 14. Another fun thing one hears in this building sometimes is, and it was mentioned earlier, the Abraham Accords. That's the way to peace, isn't it? As Iracha said earlier, it forgot the most important thing. And it's very rare. It's very rare in actual international politics that you get an opportunity to do something and very quickly to test out whether it does what's written on the tin. Abraham Accords, more peaceful Middle East, worst ever crisis in the region, most bloodshed, most war, just after the Abraham Accords. Am I saying the Abraham Accords are responsible for this? No, I'm not. Am I saying that the idea that the Abraham Accords have brought a more peaceful region, that the signatories to the Abraham Accords have impacted Israel's actions, is a huge fallacy? Yes, I am. So let's treat with the contempt they deserve some of the things that occasionally get far too much of an airing in this chamber. And let me end just with this thought and really reflecting on what I heard from some of our colleagues earlier, which kind of, you know, it's a lefty gathering, so we have to ask what is to be done, right? And what we've heard with conviction and in quite a compelling way is that we all know the parameters. It can only be two states, and anything else is naive, it's a fantasy, it's a recipe for more bloodshed. But I want to pause and question that a little. We need a future for Israeli Jews, we need a future for Palestinians that is better than what is on offer today. There is a Jewish right to self-determination. There is also an actual existing Zionism and Israel. And the history of that has been antithetical in reality to Palestinian rights and Palestinian existence. Now, maybe there's a way around this, but we at least have to acknowledge that partition, as voted for by a pre-decolonization UN in 1947, there were 55 states voting then. I think 33 voted in favor. Partition led to Nakba, because the state that was created under partition would not have had a Jewish majority. Oslo, the two-state effort at partition, led to the biggest land grab since the Nakba. The number of settlers has increased fivefold since Oslo in the West Bank alone. Separation has led to the kind of dehumanization which allows what we see today and what we saw on October 7th to happen. The actual existing two-state model that we have of the PA is a Bantustan. There's a reason that 24 states at the ICJ advisory opinion hearings referenced apartheid, most notably South Africa, Namibia, and the African Union. There is a reason that in its ruling on that advisory opinion, the ICJ said that Israel was guilty of violating the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination by practice of segregation and apartheid. That's the two-state model that we are moving towards. And what we have is, well, that's what we have now. Okay, I'll tell you. And what we have is a one-state reality. The position of the Israeli government, and in this, Nasser was absolutely right, okay? It can't be a zero sum. I don't believe in an Algeria outcome where it's Greater Palestine, no Israeli Jews. I don't believe in an outcome where it's Greater Israel and finishing the Nakba and no Palestinians. There was a vote, just to shift the attention to how fantastical and hallucinatory two states that sounds today. There was a vote in the Israeli Knesset on the 18th of July. Prime Minister Netanyahu, for spurious reasons, put forward a resolution. The resolution said there can be no Palestinian state. It said more than that, but that was the bottom line. Not one Zionist member of Knesset. Mossi is no longer a member of Knesset. And had Mossi have been there, I wouldn't be able to say this, okay? But not one sitting Zionist member of Knesset, not from Labour, not from Lapid's party, not from Gantz's party, obviously not from the governing coalition, voted against this resolution. In other words, said yes to two states. Now, I'm not therefore saying that the only possibility is one state. What I'm saying is, there is an opportunity to look at the reality hard and say, maybe we can still undo at least the 67 occupation. Maybe we can't, and it has to be a South Africa equality outcome. But to suggest that somehow there's still this easy two-state thing out there to achieve doesn't do justice to the difficulty that we are facing. And therefore, I'm not here to try to sell you on either of those solutions. What I want to suggest is, until there is a different incentive structure in play, until there is a different cost-benefit calculation on the side of the more powerful occupying party denying Palestinian rights, until that exists, we won't know. We won't know whether evacuating settlements or according Palestinians equality is more possible. We also need the Palestinians to speak. We don't have a Palestinian leadership which represents its people at the moment. Nasser is not part of that leadership. I'm not saying anything prejudicial towards Nasser in saying that. And I say this because I believe that we have just been handed a new tool to get away from this debate of which is more of a hallucination. The tool we have been handed is the advisory opinion offered by the International Court of Justice on the 19th of July, codified in a UN General Assembly, because of course it couldn't get through the Security Council, codified in a UN General Assembly resolution 126/26. And what that tells us is the entirety of the occupation is illegal, and that all third parties, all states have a responsibility not to be complicit in that ongoing illegality. And that poses questions to a Europe that claims to be normative, to a Europe that claims to be an upholder of international law. Europe managed to, as someone mentioned earlier, split its vote 3 ways in the General Assembly: fors, againsts, abstentions. You guys aren't a majority in this parliament, I know. But there's room to pose the question, what would it mean for Europe to be in compliance with international law, to be in compliance with an ICJ ruling, to be in compliance with Resolution 126/26? And if the Commission is incapable of coming forward and doing that, And if you can't get a majority in parliament to come forward and do that, nothing prevents people in this room and outside of this room saying, well, we're going to commission a study and we're going to take the results of that study and we're going to argue for how our institutions can be in compliance with international legality on this question. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. Always challenging the theoretical framework of the case. You are very welcome, always. We are connecting now with Diana Butu. Is not only an academician, has been linking politics to the PLO and negotiator, as Daniel in some of the past attempts to reach a permanent peaceful situation in the Middle East. Are you there, Diana? Diana? No?
Difficulties connecting. She has been having difficulties connecting.
Yeah, apparently we had these problems before when we tried to do a rehearsal. May I ask you, Samer Sinilawi, to have a contribution? I'm not saying on behalf of Diana, but of course from yourself, please, because we have.
Thank you. I'm happy
we are lucky
to be
having you here.
back. Plan B, but I'll try to be short because I guess we have already exceeded the time, so I'll try to be short and precise. Well, I feel belonging to this place for two reasons. First of all, I am half Spanish, so in a way I can feel home, but I'm here trying to represent more my Palestinian people. And second, because I come and I grew up in politics in the International Union of Socialist Youth, the USI. We have managed to acquire membership for Fatah Youth in the 90s, and we became part of the Social Democrats group. I would like to make a quick comment on the argument of one state or two state solutions. I guess maybe if you ask the young generations, the Palestinian young generation, what do they prefer? Most probably, the answer will be, we are accepting both options, and we would like to leave to the Israelis the possibility to choose. If they are welcoming a one-state full rights option, we will take it. If I will be an equal citizen to Morsi and vote to the Knesset and be a prime minister, I think these options will be welcome. Taking into consideration that today, between the river and the sea, there are 51% of Palestinians and less than 49% of Jews. So if it is a one-state solution, it's going to be Palestinian. And the other option, the two-state solution, is welcome. So the negotiations should be internally by Israelis, not among Israelis and Palestinians. They need to decide one direction. Because what is not accepted by the Palestinians now is the current situation of a two-floor state, where they are in the master's floor and we are in the servant's floor. This cannot continue. And we cannot accept to continue, and we cannot accept to wait. There is a sense of urgency from the Palestinian side to have a solution now. I think during the last year we have witnessed two things. The collapse of the international order. This is left only in the books of those students who are trying to acquire a degree in political science or international law, but in politique real, it's not there. And we have witnessed a total moral collapse worldwide. And what I am seeing here in this house also frightens me, because, and here I would like to differentiate between Benjamin Netanyahu and Israel and Israelis, because the two things are not the same. Please try your best that Bibi will not transfer this house into a circus like he has done in the Congress. The Congress is becoming Bibi's Netanyahu circus, and we have seen this during his speech. And there is a trend now here that is going into this direction. This needs to be the fortress for the values. And among the values, since we are in a social democratic family, is democracy. And this brings me to another point that I would like to bring again, which is the way Europe is looking into the Palestinian internal issues. When I was in the UC in the 90s, in the mid-90s, I was in the 20s. Abbas at that time, he was in the 50s. And when we used to go and meet him as young leaders of Fatah, at the end of each meeting, he used to tell us, you are the leaders of tomorrow. This damn tomorrow never came until today, and we are still waiting.
You're still the leaders of tomorrow.
Okay. All those young politicians of the UC family entered the parliament, became ministers. Now they are retired, and our generation are still waiting for a chance to participate in the political life. And all your government are still sleeping in the bed of the same guy that has been ruling us, not for the last 20 years. He has been number 2 since the 60s. So for the last 60-something years, he has been somehow taking decisions on behalf of Palestinians. I think this is not a Palestinian internal issue. It's a matter of principles, and we need to defend the principle of the right of the Palestinians, at least if you are not able to do something on our rights in front of the Israelis, at least be fair into trying to respect our rights to have some space of democracy, to breathe some oxygen, not to be ruled under 2 layers of oppression. I don't want to make it tall. I would like to end it here, and thank you very much for the invitation, and thank you very much to have me fill the gap of Diana. She's a wonderful speaker. I was looking forward to hear her, but we understand the technical difficulties. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Samer. Amy, you asked for the floor. Yeah, the questions. Yeah. Okay, please. Yes.
Well, okay. Thank you very much, Nacho, for giving me the floor, and thanks to our guests for their initial remarks or inputs. I am happy, of course, to see that there are more UC veterans here in this conference. I was myself active in UC just a couple of years ago, Secretary General, and worked quite a lot with both Meretz, young Meretz, of course, Young Labour, with Fatah Youth and with Al-Mubadara and the different organizations in the region, not at least on this topic, of course. I want to maybe first just a thing on the UNRWA. I think it's good you brought it up, Daniel, about the issue of UNRWA, because this is an ongoing discussion here in the European Parliament. It feels like every year we put a lot of energy and focus on the textbooks. It's quite interesting because I once raised it with an Israeli friend of mine from Meretz, and he said, even next time, ask your colleagues from the conservative, big part of the liberals, and of course the far right, have you looked into Israeli textbooks also? Because the Israeli text, one of the issues that has been raised is that Palestine do not exist in the, Israel doesn't exist in the Palestinian textbooks, but Palestine doesn't exist in the Israeli textbooks also. And if we say, okay, put Israel in or put Palestine in, which I think we should, to both sides. But then we also need to say, according to 67 borders, for example. Otherwise, it will be impossible for any of them to put one or the other into the textbooks. But of course, as soon as we raise that there are problems within the Israeli textbooks also, many of our colleagues are closing their eyes. In addition to that, we already know also many of the allegations have shown to be not truth at all. I also want to thank you, Daniel, for helping us to mobilize in this parliament, because it's not easy many times as social democrats. But with your help, we are able to also mobilize sometimes people, not at least in the liberal group here in the parliament. But my first question concerns the solution, two states or one state solution. Don't we need to, at some point, at least say this is the solution to ensure that there is also some kind of steps taken towards it? Because if we say we don't care about two-state or one-state solution, then also political steps to be taken towards the solution, I mean, it will be harder to take steps to any kind of solutions. Until now, to be frank, for myself, I'm still on the thought of that the two-state solution seems to be more the visible one, even though, of course, none of them might be perfect, none of them might be easy, but more realistic one. But as a part of going from words to actions, we need to do something to ensure the two-state solution. One of them is the recognition of Palestine, which Sweden did 2014, which Spain and Ireland is doing right now, which is very much important, because then we can at least in concrete way take one step towards the goal. And then also more concretely, what can we do? Would you say, for example, that a weapon embargo would be a good way forward? I think it would be important with a weapon embargo, as Israel is acting right now and killing a lot of innocent civilians in Gaza. But also, as you rightly mentioned, it's not only Gaza. Also, we see the West Bank and people in West Bank being deprived their lives and being killed. And with my own background as Swedish, but with Kurdish roots, I know very well what this kind of oppression, how it affects people. I once met a former Israeli ambassador who said that, oh, now I understand why you're pro-Palestinian, because you are Kurdish by origin. And then my answer was actually in the line, as you said, Musi, that I'm not pro-Palestine. Okay, but my answer was that pro-Palestine means that I'm anti-something, and I'm not anti-Israel. I'm pro-peace. That's where it lays, and we know that in this conflict there is an occupying power and an occupied power, and we need to admit it. So weapon embargo, EU-Israeli association agreement, to freeze it, to suspend it, and of course also we have been calling for sanction against Ben-Gvir and Smotrich. Those proposals, how would it also be received in Israel? I think, we need to do something. We need to take steps forwards, both short-term and long-term. Short-term, ceasefire; long-term, two-state solution. Thank you.
Thank you, Evin. Just before I'm asking Marco, do you want to contribute, please? Marco Tarquinio.
Grazie.
Thank you. I listened very carefully. I'm sorry, I will be speaking Italian, and I'm sorry for missing the first part of this debate. I hope I won't repeat something which has already been said. Well, you confirmed how much time we lost in the discussions. If our roadmap was based on what we heard tonight, we had a solution for this. But reality, unfortunately, went very fast in a different direction. However, I also believe that the only way is the achievement of the two people, two state solution, because that is a starting point that can bring to an end the tragic asymmetry that we've experienced so far between the Israeli people, which has suffered war in its own land, and it is people living in its own land, and the Palestinian people who has been under a siege for 75 years without a land, without a state, and this has to achieve an end. Of course, mutual recognition is needed, but if the international community, starting from Europe, cannot bring forth this recognition and conditioning the political power, we won't get anywhere. And we will only follow the scheme of the two armies, a structured army and the other scheme, the scheme of terrorist attacks. I've also been a journalist for several decades, and I've also been telling this story. I do not sign any petitions or appeals, and over the last months, I was tempted by an Italian intellectual group with Professor Cecciari, Professor Mazzarella. They were all philosophers. They are not involved in politics, or they did so for a very short period. And they proposed a vision, something very bold. It is something even to be conceived. They propose to proceed on the European level if we have leaders in our new commission to a strong action towards both the Palestinian state and the Israeli state by saying that we should not only review current agreements, but we should also nurture new relationships with both realities, because Europe holds an, a way of acting, that of associating, of bringing together different lands between in the Mediterranean area and in the Asian area. So if we were able to do so, maybe we would also be able to attack and to create the borders that we have to define today. I know that that history isn't made of dreams, but we need a vision, a goal, and Europe today doesn't have such a goal. We are raising our own walls, but on the global scenario, we have to walk this way. I don't know if that would be sufficient. We are all waiting for the 5th of November to understand where the king of the world from the United States will be given a direction. Thank you.
Answer from Daniel and Summer if he wants to join the discussion. Please, Daniel.
Thanks. I mean, one thing I would just say, Evan, is in Gaza at least, there's the issue of Palestinian textbooks has been resolved by destroying every single school. So you can tell your colleagues that they don't have to worry about textbooks in Gaza anymore, if any of them raise that. I do want to forewarn that, especially in the King of the World Trump scenario that Marco just left dangling there, if there is a serious effort to fund alternatives to UNRWA, I would urge people to fight tooth and nail not to go down that path. In fact, I think questions should be asked as to what is the responsibility of the country dropping the 2,000-pound bombs on Gaza to the European taxpayer-funded programs, projects, installations that have been destroyed? And do they have a responsibility? As to your direct questions, look, the thing is, no seriousness of political purpose, I'm not saying due to the fault of anyone in this room necessarily, but no seriousness of political purpose has been put into trying to make two states an outcome. So it becomes an empty rhetorical device. I mean, let's be frank. You can't even ban settlement products. I mean, that's the lowest. If one reads the ICJ ruling, that is the lowest bar. And here, that's probably the highest inconceivable bar. And I just want to open a parenthetical and say, I don't think anything does more of an injustice almost to the genuine need to push back in an increasingly intolerant period in the world against anti-Semitism than this conflation, than the misappropriation and misuse. Like, if you wish ill, if you don't care at all about the well-being of the largest Jewish community in the world, which is in Israel, then yes, that's a real problem. But that's not about the state structures or the policies that that country pursues. So anyway, I'm just saying that lowest bar of a ban on settlement products, or even more seriously going after rules of origin, are those being respected so that there is absolutely no contagion of the illegalities of the settlements in anything that is enjoying the benefits of the free trade agreement? That's not happening. Recognition, if it doesn't then translate into what do you do about the fact that another state is illegally occupying the territory that you just recognized, doesn't get us very far. Now, I'll give credit. Many of the countries, well, there weren't many of them to begin with, but the countries that just recently recognized Palestine have leaned in a bit more. For instance, joining the South Africa case at the ICJ. I'm not a big fan, personally. I'm interested in what you think, Mossi. At sanctions on Smotrich and Ben-Gvir personally, or other individuals. I'm much more interested in what you said, which the UK decision just now, which is Amanah, which is a much larger organization and kind of holding enterprise, which is more significant. I mean, honestly, for some of these people, it's a badge of pride. It's not like it's ruined their next holiday in Euro Disney. To be honest, I'd rather they spent all their time in Europe rather than settling the hills of biblical Samaria. Last thing on this, which is links to the Trump-Harris question and weapons embargo. I imagine that some states are in violation of their own laws, were they to be taking a serious judicial look at that. By the way, one of the things that ICJ ruling that I insist on referring to frequently, and resolution 12626, put it into your memory. I would argue it's more important today than 242, 12626. One of the things that opens up is legal options in various jurisdictions for going after governments, for being complicit, for being in dereliction of their duty under international law, etc. So I think a weapons embargo matters. In a Trump scenario, Europe will have a lot of hard questions to ask itself. I fear that today's European political leadership is not best equipped to come up with good answers to that question. Top of that list may not be what we do on Israel-Palestine, but it should be on that list. In a Harris scenario, I would argue that giving tools to parts of the Democrat Party, to probably some who will be in a Harris administration, by saying, look, this is what other states are doing, giving tools to those who will continue to bring legal challenges in the US, that's a good idea. I think where you are is essentially you've used all the carrots, right? You've given Israel all the big juicy carrots. And all you have left to bring to the table is these scrawny, kind of half rabbit-eaten, molding carrots. And does anyone believe that that's going to change the Israeli calculation? What has been conspicuously absent, and I was interested, and I haven't read that, I will go back and look for it. I was interested that Josep Borrell mentioned the announcement of the meeting led by Saudi and Norway about creating an international coalition for two states and using carrots and sticks. Let's see it. I don't like sticks, but I think it's all quite simple, really. If you do things that are wrong, morally wrong, legally wrong, violate human rights, make peace impossible, and you are treated with impunity, nay, you are rewarded with upgrades of relations, with invitations to the Foreign Affairs Council, with Abraham Accord normalization, you're going to carry on misbehaving. What we haven't tried is to generate accountability. And no one in Israel is going to thank you. No one's going to say, great. But over time, alongside being angry, I think it will be easier in Israel for people to say, of course they shouldn't have done that, but now what do we do? Because there's a cost to this permanent occupation. And by the way, I don't want the cost to be violence. What we have done by closing off avenues of diplomacy, of politics, of economic sanctions, of sports sanctions. Israel shouldn't be allowed to participate in European sport while it has teams illegally in the Israeli Football Association who are based in the settlements. That comes under the Palestine jurisdiction in FIFA. But of course, FIFA and UEFA are hardly paragons of transparent, accountable global governance. So none of that's going to happen. But if one closes all those avenues, then things blow up in the worst of ways.
Thank you, David. Samer, please.
Okay, again, quickly. Down history, nothing can help the United States and most of the European countries to be free from the stain of being part of what's happening in Gaza now. It doesn't help. Israel is simply a bomb contractor for USA. And I've read something a couple of days ago. In 1982, it took Ronald Reagan 2 minutes, a call of 2 minutes with Begin to stop the war in Lebanon. He told him, stop. And after 23 minutes, he convened the cabinet and stopped the war. At the same time, Senator Biden was in Jerusalem meeting with Begin and arguing him, why did he listen? He should have continued the war. This same Biden today is still in the same mental jet lag. He cannot depart Biden with the legacy of being the senator, the president, most supportive to the Jewish people, and the Jewish people for him is Bibi Netanyahu, is not the Israelis. So the coalition he has created is USA, part of Europe, with Bibi against Israelis and Palestinians. Because if you ask the Israelis, they want to stop the war and they want the release of the prisoners, of the hostages. Nobody wants an open, ongoing war except of Bibi. And I think maybe the obligation of Europe today is to try to distance themselves from USA and tell them, we in the West, we don't agree. This should be continue. This is the only way to try to put an end to this war. I want to end with a suggestion. If the Congress gave a platform to Bibi, I think your parliament should be giving platform as quick as possible to voices of reason in Palestine and Israel, like Dr. Nasser and Uhud Olmert and Mosi. Bring them to speak and represent Israelis and Palestinians and have the message that represents most of Israelis and Palestinians, because I believe even after the 7th of October and the war in Gaza, most of Israelis and Palestinians are still deep inside looking for an exit from this conflict. But they are kidnapped by leaders who are taking them somewhere else. We have 101 hostages, Israeli hostages in the bunkers of Sinwar. We have millions of Israelis hostages in the bunkers of Netanyahu since 24 years. And we have millions of Palestinians who are hostages in the bunkers of Abbas since 20 years. And we need to release everyone, all Palestinians, all Israelis, and the prisoners and the hostages who are part of the deal. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Samer, and thank you, Daniel. These political groups always had this idea of listen to everyone having a word and being reasonable and try to look for a better future. And this is the example of this policy is this event that now is going to be closed by our Vice President, Yanis Maniatis.
Thank you. I'm going to thank everybody for this extremely constructive exchange of ideas, thoughts, etc. I want to thank all the members of the S&D members for their participation and the attendance. This event marks the occasion for the S&D group to highlight once more our key messages concerning the Middle East peace process and the situation in the region, which we continue to observe with growing concern. The absolute priority is to break the spiral of violence and stop the suffering of civilians. We are close to the victims, to the people struggling in Gaza, in the West Bank, in Lebanon, to the families of Israeli hostages still under brutal captivity by Hamas. It is time to act for more than just calls for ceasefire and humanitarian aid. It is urgent to address the long-term underlying problems and work on solutions that can finally allow a new perspective for the two-state solution. The EU and its partners in the Middle East must act to initiate a regional peace conference, create a new framework for security, push for de-escalation. Respecting international law and recognizing a basic Palestinian state are the first necessary steps to start the process. The ultimate and only goal still remains having the state of Israel and an independent, democratic, contiguous, and viable Palestinian state composed of the Gaza Strip, East Jerusalem, and the West Bank, living side by side in peace and security. We put forward these proposals as progressives under a very difficult political and institutional context within the European Parliament. The right and extreme right forces together are deliberately ignoring the need for an objective discussion on the situation in Gaza and in the West Bank, as well as for a clear sign of respect for international law and UN institutions, and with this approach they endanger the credibility and the role of the European Union in the relaunch of the peace process. To conclude, as a symbol of our commitment to achieving peace and dialogue in the region, I am glad to inform you that the S&D Group has decided to nominate to the Sakharov Prize for Freedom of Thought the two Israeli and Palestinian women's organizations, Women Wage Peace and Women of the Sun. We are working to achieve support on their candidature, also by other groups. It would be the best way for the European Parliament to show that hope in a peaceful solution in the region still exists. Thank you very much for your attention.